Hello, I'm Rick Basinski, Chief Economist at IBISWorld. Welcome back for those of you who tuned in to my previous presentations. And like my last three webinars, I will focus on the labor market and the recent surge in unemployment. Just a reminder that the general purpose of these presentations is to analyze the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is episode 11 of the series. I recommend you review episodes 8, 9, and 10. Now that parts of the economy are opening gradually, my motivation is to identify employers that will rehire quickly against those that will lag seriously behind. Also, which industry segments face longer-term challenges. Again, the end game here will be to assess credit quality for both consumer and commercial lending, all tied to employment prospects. And feel free to pause because there's a lot of data in the tables that I provide, and you might want to take a closer look. As a point of reference, here are unemployment rates by sector this April compared with a year earlier. Today, I'll be covering both retail and wholesale trade. Note the relatively high unemployment rates for this group. I'll disentangle this in what follows. But first, just a couple of basics I've mentioned in past episodes of this series and in the many papers I've written on lending and general business risks. In summary, during times of economic and financial stress, number one, both retail and wholesale trade employees are more vulnerable if they sell expensive discretionary goods like jewelry than if they offer non-discretionary products or services like basic foods. Number two, there is a greater risk if they provide durable goods like refrigerators than if they sell non-durable items like paper products, toothpaste, etc. So discretionary, durable items are a no-go. Think of expensive cars, for example. This chart illustrates how closely retail and wholesale trade mirror the general unemployment rate. They march in tandem. And note how they both spiked in April, unprecedented stuff. Most of this was obviously due to social distancing and government-mandated lockdowns, so reopenings are, hopefully, a good sign. But as I mentioned in my last webinar, many workers are taking in more money via extended unemployment benefits than if they go back to work. And many of these are part-timers. Plus, small-time retail operators are rightfully conservative. They'll need sustained good news to get comfortable rehiring. Here's an interesting graphic, especially if you have exposures in both retail and wholesale trade. Retail unemployment rates always exceed those in wholesale, regardless of where we're at in the cycle. And the April numbers are no exception. So have you stratified your trade book of business into two categories, retail and wholesale? Most smart banks and other businesses have. How about you? Let's start this off with retail. Here's a chart comparing unemployment rates between retail trade and the general national unemployment rate. What a beating retail took. Almost 1/5 of retail workers are unemployed as of April. I'm sure the underemployed adds to this figure. There's likely to be a reduction or at least a stabilization of these rates in coming months with the stickiness I just mentioned, and amid concerns about how the economic recovery gains momentum and trepidations over a second virus wave. So here's how we're going to drill down today for retail employment. Remember to pause and take notes when you see an area where you have a keen interest. I'll get in somewhat meticulous detail with motor vehicles and parts dealers, furniture, electronics, and appliance stores, building materials, garden equipment and supplies, food and beverage, and health and personal care stores, and other retailing, a potpourri of interesting cases. This group, motor vehicle and parts dealers, don't look that bad during the previous cycle. Here I calculated the average employment growth rates for both the 2009 through 2011 and 2012 through 2014 periods. This represents the last cycle's downturn and the first recovery stage. I'm surely a little less sanguine for new car dealers than historical data suggests. As I mentioned in previous episodes, there's no cars for clunkers this time around, and there's overcapacity and oversupply in the auto industry worldwide. But with road traffic slowly on the rise in America, auto parts dealers and tire stores should be on the mend. Bike shops should be fine too. As for furniture, electronics, and appliance stores, many employers in this segment clearly define the hazardous twin attributes of being both reliant on discretionary and durable spending. So talk about misaligned stars. As a result, redeployment of workers here is likely to be a long slog. In camera stores, I'm not sure if I've even seen one of these in the last decade or two. Employees in building materials, garden equipment, and supplies define an interesting case. They are made up of numerous local and regional players. Those catering to households might fare well soon. Folks like me have pent-up energy to home improve, or at least in my case, plant hundreds of flowers, since COVID-19 delayed the usual Mother's Day present for my wife. And as for food, beverage, and health and personal care store workers, these are primarily non-durable, non-discretionary verticals, so they should be okay in general, many being exempt from social distancing and lockdown strictures anyway. Many will reopen soon, albeit the risks I've already discussed. It'll be interesting to see how this pans out, but I'm relatively optimistic. By the way, my hair hasn't been this long since 1970. I'm scheduled to get it cut next week, thank goodness. In the next two slides, I'll consider other or miscellaneous retail employment. In this slide, I red arrow segments that are clearly at risk going forward, namely retailers selling books, records, and, as I've discussed in other episodes, long-suffering department stores. On this table, I've red flagged florists, art dealers, and sellers of manufactured homes. I don't think this needs further explanation. In contrast, employees at big player warehouse and supercenters and the smaller dollar stores should be relatively okay going forward. As so are those working for e-commerce and some used goods stores depending on local conditions. Let me quickly turn to wholesale trade. Here I chart wholesale's unemployment rate juxtaposed to the general national rate. As you can see, wholesaler rates are much lower than the overall rate. This suggests that employment risks are less daunting for this sector compared with many other industries, something for risk managers to keep in mind. Although wholesale's unemployment rate jumped to nearly 10% in April, it was still well below the national average. I'm going to finish off today's session doing something a little bit different. Consider dividing wholesale trade into two parts as depicted in this chart. The first, wholesalers that primarily sell directly to retailers, and the second, wholesalers that supply goods directly to end users, or what I call non-retail buyers. As for the first, since wholesale is upstream from retail trade, retailers that are suffering drag down the wholesale business that supply them. Earlier today, slide 4 clearly illustrates this correlation, although the historical unemployment rate for retail trade is significantly greater than that for wholesale trade. Hence, in the previous slides, I discussed the health of multiple retail industries, which translates into the well-being of their wholesale counterparts. So in what follows, I'm going to deal with wholesalers involved in non-retail end markets with an added twist. That being, I'll use IBISWorld's one-year forward-looking industry risk scores to identify which of wholesale's buying industries are in a high-risk category. In short, using our industry risk rating scores along with IBISWorld's supply chain database, I'm going to provide lists involving 4 key wholesaler end markets: agriculture and related industries, manufacturing, transportation, and finally construction. Actually, IBISWorld clients with access to these databases can easily undertake exercises like this yourself using our online industry wizard data retrieval tool. Just ask your CRM. The next 5 slides list currently vulnerable wholesale industries and the specific buyer industries that are at risk over the next 12 to 18 months, all with 6-digit NAICS codes. So for portfolio managers out there, you can assess your exposures. I'm not going to go through these one by one, so if you have a specific interest, just pause this presentation and take a closer look. On this table are wholesalers that sell to agricultural businesses and the particular ag industries that are at risk. Here's the same for manufacturing. Some very interesting cases here to be sure. You may want to spend some time perusing this and the next slide. And here's the second half of the very long manufacturing wholesale end market list. Take some time to look at this as well. This table shows the vulnerable wholesalers that supply transportation-related businesses. And finally, here is construction. No real surprises here. Well, that's it for today. Thanks very much for joining me. My next webinar will continue the theme of investigating employment issues. Hope to see you then. Stay safe and Godspeed.